Welcome to the 27th Annual Chicago Tribune Printers Row Lit Fest. A special thank you to our sponsors. Before we begin today's program, please turn off your cell phone and all other electric devices. Photographs are not permitted. Today's program will be recorded for future broadcast on C-SPAN's BookTv. If there's time at the end for a Q&A session with the author, we ask you to use the microphone located at the center of the room so that the home viewing audience can hear your question. To check the schedule of when this program will air, go to www.booktv.org. Please welcome moderator Karen R. Long and Deborah Baker, author of The Convert.
Good morning. It's wonderful to be here, and thank you for joining us. I drove here from Cleveland, where I am the book review editor, and I was delighted to be occupied with a complex subject and an engaging biographer. Deborah Baker seems allergic to the facile answer and drawn to lives that are complicated and eliciting more questions than answers. So if that is your cup of tea, you've walked into the right room. Because Margaret Marcus, who became Maryam Jamala, is so complicated, I thought the respectful and interesting thing to do would be to begin with some of her words. So we're going to ask Deborah Baker to read for us.
Hi, thank you all for coming. It's great to be in Chicago. I love this city so much, and especially on such a beautiful day. Just a brief thing before I read from this. This is a letter that Maryam Jamila wrote to her parents on board this ship, a Greek freighter that was taking her from Brooklyn, New York, to Karachi, Pakistan, and from there she would move to Lahore. This was the first of the letters that I found at the New York Public Library, which was my introduction to Margaret Marcus, Maryam Jamila. May 1962, the Hellenic Torch. This was posted from Alexandria, Egypt. After all our goodbyes, after you, Mother, Betty, and Walter walked down the gangplank and drove off, I was overcome by a profound sense of dread. I stood at the deck rail for a long time, completely stricken, the excitement of the weeks leading up to my departure gone. When the ship finally pulled away from the Brooklyn pier, the lights of the city began to dim, and the engine seemed to echo the pounding of my heart. A black and fathomless ocean was slowly swallowing everything I had ever known. It took some time and many prayers before my fear began to subside. So she goes on to to tell her parents about the various odd characters on board. There's a captain and his Greek crew who were very suspicious of her this journey that she was making to Pakistan. Mother, you imagined I was going to need my nice silk dress for dining and dancing on board, as if my passage had been booked on a cruise ship instead of a cheap Greek freighter. I was happy to leave that dress behind with Betty, her sister, along with my girdle and corset, and my high heels I gave to the colored lady who lived in the room across from mine at Martha Jeffer Women's Residence. Dressed now in my hand-sewn ankle-length dirndl skirt and high-neck long-sleeve blouse, I certainly see that I cut an unlikely figure. Anyone might well ask, why would an otherwise attractive Western woman insist on dressing in such a manner? Honestly, I don't blame him. The captain tells me that he's just returned from Turkey. Despite Mustafa Kemal's Ataturk best efforts to persecute Muslims by outlawing polygamy, the Hajj, and the Arabic script, it seems that the captain found no dearth of religious fanatics. I asked him what he meant by religious fanatic. Muslims who refuse to eat pork for fear of hell, he informed me. Muslims who avoid non-Muslims like the plague. He would be perfectly happy to see the Muslim religion eradicated, he said, because everyone knows Western civilization is superior. While Istanbul and Ankara are fairly westernized and home to many Europeans, he assured me that the rest of Turkey was as backward and reactionary as ever. a young Greek sailor chimed in, "You'll see for yourself the filth and poverty of the Arabs when you get there."
So there you have it. You have a 27-year-old woman who grew up on Long Island throwing it all off to get on this ship and join a foster father she's never met in her pursuit of holiness, in her longing for community. And yesterday, Louis Uria was speaking about his own ancestor who was a healer in 19th century Mexico, and he spoke of the catastrophe of holiness. And that phrase stuck to my ribs because of the difficulty of someone who moves against what they've been given in their religious pursuit. Can you talk to us a little, Deborah, about what grabbed you in the letters with this voice and this profoundly unorthodox quest?
Well, you've heard a little bit of her voice, and I just was so struck by the sharpness and the clarity and the sort of enthusiasm of it. It was like reading some person who's like going to Europe for the first time, and everything's new, and she wants to write down absolutely everything she sees and convey the excitement of this journey to her parents. And in the back of my mind, even though I'm reading these letters, with great excitement, this was like in the spring of 2007 when I first sort of stumbled upon them completely by chance, I thought, this is not going to end well. You just have this sense that this woman has no idea what she's sailing off into the wild blue yonder towards. And, just like that Greek shipmate, you'll see for yourself, that's sort of in the back of my mind, but I can't sort of tear myself away from these letters. So that's sort of how I begin the book, is that I involve the reader in this sort of discovery and, this sense of, what's going to happen next.
So we have a thorny detective question in this woman, and one of the things I was thinking about as I read was an observation Martin Marty made. He's a Lutheran theologian I admire, that one can't have a conversation with anyone unless one knows the places from which they view the world. And as a journalist, I thought, bingo, what have I been doing as an interviewer? It's partly the homework of trying to figure out the vantage points one brings to their view of the world. Can you talk, Deborah, a little bit about the foundational vantage points of Miriam and also your own?
Sure. Well, Miriam grew up, Peggy Marcus, actually in Westchester, New York, Larchmont, Mamaroneck, New York, and a sort of bedroom community of New York City. Her parents were secular Jews, but they celebrated Christmas and Easter. She loved Christmas music. She loved classical music, Easter baskets, the whole thing. And she didn't even really quite understand that she was a Jew until she was sort of in kindergarten, and she began, the sort of playground taunts from sort of Catholic school children began. They threw rocks at her. They called her, Christ killer, the usual anti-Semitism. And so, she began to, what is this? What is it? This Judaism? And so her parents ended up sending her to temple, to Hebrew school. And she was fascinated by these stories, the stories of, her ancestors living in land, these biblical lands, and it made them seem so much more exciting than the Jews that she was growing up around. She was shunned by the Orthodox Jews in her immediate community because she lived in a non-kosher household. So she was sort of surrounded by all these sort of tribal divisions, but in Bible school, she was sort of looking at the Jews and Arabs living side by side, harmoniously, and it just seemed, very simple, desert, tribal community, very, and it sort of excited her imagination. And she was born in 1934, so she came of age during the Second World War. She, hit adolescence, right at that moment when, everyone was learning about what had happened, in Eastern Europe to the Jews, and she was a kind of child, very precocious child